veiled or blackened faces, and they'd be dressed in white. Candle lanterns carved from turnips were part of the traditional festival, as was apple bobbing. Larger turnips would be hollowed out, carved with faces, and placed in windows to ward off evil spirits. Now, guisers were men and children in disguise, and we know that they were prevalent in 16th century Scotland, in the countryside. Children would go door to door guising in costumes and masks, carrying these turnip lanterns. But they would offer entertainment of various sorts in return for food or coins. And this continues in Scotland well into the 20th century. Okay, the ancient Celts believed that the border between this world and the other world was at its thinnest on Samhain. So this allowed spirits, both harmless and harmful, to pass through. What would happen is that the family's ancestors were honored and invited home, while harmful spirits were warded off. It's believed that the need to ward off harmful spirits led to initially the wearing of costumes and masks. Their purpose was to disguise oneself as a harmful spirit and thus avoid harm. It was also the custom to set a plate at the table for the dead and to tell stories of ancestors and to invite them back to mingle with the living. Okay, divination is a common folkloric practice that also was connected to Samhain. The most common uses for divination were to determine the identity of one's future spouse, the location of one's future home, and how many children a person might have. Seasonal foods such as apples and nuts were often employed in these rituals. Apples would be peeled, the peel would be tossed over the shoulder, and its shape examined to see if it formed the first letter of your future spouse's name. Nuts were roasted on the hearth, and their movements interpreted. If the nuts stayed together, so would the couple. Egg whites would be dropped in a glass of water, and the shapes foretold the number of future children someone might have. And as I said, they also play games like the apple bobbing that is still part of our modern Halloween. Okay, let's turn to Christianity. Now, the first really strong pope is named Gregory the Great, and he was pope during the 6th century. Now, it was Gregory's job, he felt, to convert the pagan tribes of Western Europe to Christianity. And so Gregory basically thought, what is the best way to do this? And he came to the conclusion that it was far better to persuade people to convert than to force them to convert. So what he did is he established a string of Benedictine monasteries all over Western Europe. And monks and missionaries would flow out of these monasteries and go visit the people and share with them the gospel and proselytize, try to convert them to Christianity. He also made a very curious decision, because what Gregory wanted to do was to produce quick conversions. So he decided to co-opt pagan holidays, like those 8 major holidays of the Celtic calendar, and also sacred sites. So, for example, there might be a sacred grove of trees that the Druids performed rituals at, and he would just build a church there on that site. In terms of what happens with Samhain, is that Samhain, as I said, is sort of co-opted by the church. All Hallows Day, which is celebrated by the church on the 1st of November, is a solemn holiday held in honor of all saints, known and unknown. This holiday is also known as All Saints' Day. The next day, All Souls' Day, commemorates the faithfully departed. Traditionally, All Souls' Day is associated with the doctrine that the souls of the faithful who at death had not been cleansed from sins cannot immediately go to heaven and instead spend a period of time in purgatory. So on All Souls' Day, these souls could be helped by prayer and attendance at Mass. This holiday is also known as the Feast of All Souls, and in Mexico is celebrated as Dia de los Muertos, which I'll be talking about in a couple minutes. So over time, the night of October 31st came to be called All Hallows Eve, and the Remnants Festival, dedicated to the dead, eventually morphed into the secular holiday known as Halloween. Okay, now at the time of the mass transatlantic Irish and Scottish immigration to the United States, guising still had a strong tradition in Scotland and Ireland. In Scotland, the costumed child performs some trick, for example, singing a song or telling a ghost story to earn their treats. Very different kind of from the American version. In the U.S., the word trick, instead of entertaining or telling ghost stories, trick refers to this kind of mostly idle threat to perform mischief on the homeowners or their property if a treat is not given. Now, American historian Ruth Edna Kelly wrote the first book-length history of the holiday as practiced in the United States in 1919. We know that the earliest known reference to ritual begging on Halloween in English-speaking North America occurs in 1911 when a newspaper in Ontario reported that it was normal for the smaller children to go street guising on Halloween between 6 and 7 p.m., visiting shops and neighbors to be rewarded with nuts and candies for their rhymes and songs. The earliest known use in print of the term trick or treat appears again in Canada in 1927. So trick-or-treating does not seem to have become a widespread practice in the United States until the 1930s, till fairly recently. Halloween costumes were traditionally modeled after monsters or ghosts, but over time, of course, selection was extended to include celebrities or generic archetypes like ninjas or princesses. Costuming became popular for Halloween parties in the U.S. also in the 1930s, as often for adults as for children. The first mass-produced Halloween costumes appeared in stores in the 1930s when trick-or-treating was becoming popular in the U.S. And of course, in the U.S., instead of carving turnips, we have pumpkins, which are larger and much more easier to carve. Now, as you can see on this map, some countries around the world still celebrate Halloween or Samhain. Those countries appear in the dark orange. Countries that celebrate a similar festival of the dead are yellow in color. Now I want to say a few words about Dia de los Muertos. This is a holiday